Hi, welcome to our next section of Polity in Professional Leadership. In this session, we're going to be focusing on the community of faith, and we'll be using some focal questions. First of all, what exactly is a community of faith? Who makes up a community of faith? Number 3, how does a group of people become a community of faith? And what are the responsibilities of the community council? It's a natural tendency of some people to think that there's one right structure for an organization, and somehow if we could just get the right structure, everything would be okay. And there are multiple books and other resources that claim to offer the key to just the right organization that will allow a congregation to maximize its faithfulness and its effectiveness. In truth, that doesn't work. There are some models that really don't work. There are some processes that really don't work. But often, even the worst model will allow well-intentioned people with a clear focus to accomplish their end. So what you need to be thinking about is the most effective model for your context. Another thing that is also true is that we in the United Church have often tried to deal with difficult people by reorganizing the structure. Now, I don't know whether the United Church of Canada is uniquely prone to doing that, but I know we do it a lot. We change the structure, we disrupt life for months, all with the aim of dealing with an awkward individual. And it rarely works. Please listen carefully. Changing an organizational structure to deal with problem people almost never works. Problem people in one structure are likely to be awkward in another one. You have to bite the bullet and deal with people. Now, if we look at the New Testament, it's clear that there is no one form of organization that has a divine mandate. Instead, what we read is of a work in progress, of God's people trying to work out what it means to build their life together in a sustainable and faithful way. So the message that I take from that is the freedom of God's people to organize their life in the way that most faithfully and effectively furthers God's mission in the world. So let me ask you to think about these questions. How important do you think it is to achieve the right form of local organization? What would you name as being the most important goals or characteristics of a healthy organization? Have you ever experienced a time when a focus on structure detracted from what you felt were more important matters? So let's look at the Community of Faith section of the manual. And we can also compare the existing manual with the material that was provided with Remit 1. And what we see there is a development in detail and in thinking. So question 1, what is a community of faith? Well, the Remit simply stated that a community of faith is any group of people within the United Church that gathers to explore faith, worship, and serve. Would you consider that a sufficient and complete definition? Well, apparently it wasn't acceptable to the General Council and the framers of the manual because the manual as we have it is much more precise. A community of faith is any group of people within the United Church that A, gathers to explore faith, to worship and serve, and B, is recognized as a community of faith within the United Church by the Regional Council through a covenantal relationship between the community of faith and the Regional Council. There are many kinds of communities of people that may be recognized as communities of faith. They include pastoral charges and congregations, outreach ministries and chaplaincies, faith-based communal living situations, house churches, online communities, and others. Communities of faith may be intended as time-limited, as transitional, or ongoing. Well, how does that contrast with the forecourt model with which most people in your congregations are going to be more familiar? Well, there, the basic unit is the pastoral charge. And a pastoral charge could be one preaching point or more, 2, 3, 4, or more preaching points. You will still hear the language of pastoral charge being used, although the term does not actually appear in the manual. One of the challenges in the New Council model is that it's really unclear what a community of faith is. In a congregational setting, community of faith is employed both for one congregation and for multi-point charges. And so the following questions are still around, given the significant number of multi-point charges within the United Church of Canada. Imagine a former 3-point charge. Are those points now separated into unique communities of faith? And if they are, then what is the status of shared property, such as manses or halls, which were previously held by a pastoral charge? And if they are now 3 unique communities of faith, then what happens to the covenants of call or appointment, which were with a multi-point charge, if every congregation is considered a community of faith? Well, that's a theoretical question when we entertain engagement with the manual. The practical answer seems to be that those pastoral charges that were formerly multi-point are considered to be multi-point communities of faith. The test will come when the community of faith submits its covenant to the region, but more about that in a moment. From my perspective, this is a positive change. The willingness to recognize that communities of faith today do not always fit the historic norms we associate with congregations is a good thing. So various contemporary expressions, such as outreach ministries, chaplaincies, and so on, including online communities, can seek recognition from the Regional Council to be recognized as a community of faith within the United Church of Canada. Our second question was, who makes up a community of faith? The manual is clear. Members of the community of faith are people admitted by membership by the community of faith within denominational guidelines. And those folks are eligible for election to the denominational council and the regional council. They are entitled to vote on all community of faith matters, and they are entitled to extend the right to vote on all matters. This last one is important because in previous versions of the manual, members could extend the vote to adherents only on financial and administrative matters. Now it's possible to extend the vote to adherents on everything that comes before the congregation, the community of faith. So here's a place where some interesting questions arise. Because today the meaning of membership is a conflicted topic in many parts of society, including the church. Currently, the manual maintains the distinction between members and adherents, defining adherents as anyone who lives sufficiently proximate to the congregation to participate regularly in its life and work, but who is not a member. Remember, the manual is written for times when we are able to be physically together in worship and the work of the congregation. I'm not sure what it means in this era of virtual community and virtual worship and so on. But in other words, adherents have not had their names recorded on the historic roll of the congregation because they have come through confirmation, affirmation of faith, and or transfer of membership. Continuing to think about what membership means, it has very real historic connections in the denominations that came together to form the United Church of Canada. And that goes back well into the 1600s. Traditionally, in most countries, there were established churches. That was the Church of England in Britain and in British colonies, the Roman Catholic Church in France and other places and in their colonies in North America. You were assumed by birth to be a member of the established church. unless you chose by a specific act to remove themselves. The Church of England and the Roman Catholic Church do not have membership. They have parishes. A parish is a geographic area, and everyone in that geographic area is assumed to be part of the established church, unless they've chosen to remove themselves. Those who removed themselves became members of a non-established church, and that was an important step which in different times could have very real social, political, economic, as well as religious implications, and this was true in Canada as well. The second aspect about membership in the United Church of Canada is recalling that in the post-Second World War period in our nation, membership was an important part of self-identification. And there were various groups and service clubs and fraternities and sororities and so on that formed an important part of an individual's identity. For example, with my parents, my father would have identified himself as being part of a professional organization, the member of a church, a Mason, and the member of a golf club. Even though he never really golfed, to be part of a membership in a group was an important part of self-identity. Similarly, my mother would have identified herself as a homemaker, as a member of the UCW, as a member of the United Church, as a member of the Women's Auxiliary of our local hospital. And that would have been, if somebody had asked them who they were, that's how they would have identified themselves. And when they moved to a new community, it was important for them to shift their membership in the church from where it had been to the local expression of the United Church of Canada, quite apart from theology and programming and any other consideration. Membership was an important form of identity. Today, however, people think of membership in different ways, and our society has many different understandings of membership. And that's a challenge for organizations like the United Church, which has often attached deep importance to membership. For many people today, if they think about it at all, they link membership to participation. So if I participate in a group or a club or activity, I may well think of myself as a member, regardless of whether my name appears in any list anyway. So it'll be interesting to see how this will play out. One particularly interesting of the membership question is, what does membership mean in transient communities of faith? I'm thinking, for example, of a university chaplaincy which may choose to ask to become a recognized community of faith. Now, some parts of that community will be more stable in terms of membership. I'm thinking of faculty and staff, but some of the membership is designed to be transient. We expect students to move through university. How will they describe membership in their covenant with the region? And that's the third question. How does a group become a community of faith? And that's accomplished not simply through self-labeling. You can't set up a group and just call yourself a United Church of Canada community of faith. It requires a covenantal relationship with the regional council. The nature of the relationship, the details, and the obligations are still largely undefined, and it may, in fact, be up to the regions to set their own requirements. Question number 4. What are the responsibilities of the community council or the governing body of the local community of faith? You are or will be serving congregations in a time of transition. Many people will be using the language and the mindset of the former forecourt model. Well, how do we understand the duties of the community council? If we consider previous versions of the manual, we see that certain specified responsibilities had to be lodged somewhere. regardless of the form of local governance. So your pastoral charge could submit a governance model to the presbytery for approval, and it could be in many different conceivable forms. But one of the requirements was that certain identified and specific tasks and roles from the manual had to be clearly lodged somewhere. In other words, some parts of congregational life were deemed to be indispensable. A congregation could choose how they would do them, but getting them done was considered to be a crucial part of a healthy United Church congregation. The new model of governance for communities of faith leaves much more to the discretion of local decision-making. Now, on the one hand, freedom and responsibility are worthy things. On the other hand, sometimes it's beneficial to have some compulsion to do those things which are necessary but difficult. And so, if you're ever wondering if your local congregation or community of faith is missing anything or might be doing more, the 2010 manual sections on the duties of the pastoral charge is one good place to look. Those assumed duties, those responsibilities, have not gone away. They've just sort of faded into the background in terms of our specifics around local governance. So you might find something interesting there. Let's look at the specifics, and I'm in section B.1 of the manual now. The first duty of the community council is to covenant with the regional council, a responsibility that's fulfilled in part through ministry self-assessments and reports. Second duty is a call to witness to the gospel in the world. And if we really took that seriously, just imagine what it would do for some of our inward-focused obsessions. There's an explicit call to partnership, and that may very well be a recognition that our status in the world has changed, and we need, and we indeed benefit from, working with others. There have been times in the past when we've been reluctant to work with other people who didn't identify the same way we did. There's a growing recognition that those allies and those partnerships are required, and they can be with people of goodwill who identify themselves very differently, but who share our commitments in the community and in the world. For example, if we have a commitment to issues of environment, does it really matter whether my neighbor names God differently than I do or doesn't believe in God at all as we're cleaning up the local river? Not really. So those interactions, those partnerships, are part of how we go about doing our work as communities of faith. Ministry with youth, children, and young adults named as a priority, recognizing that we have often not done as well with those groups as we might have, and we need to be doing better work there. And there's also an explicit call to intercultural mission and ministry in a variety of expressions. And that's, at least in part, a recognition of the fact that the United Church, well, in its vast majority, most of the United Church looks very different than the community of Canada, which comes in various shades of color and expression of gender and sexual orientation, gender expression, and so many other different ways. So we need to be intentional about intercultural mission and ministry if we truly are to be a church for all Canadians. Let's look at some specifics. Governance and administration. The United Church of Canada has always tried to walk a line between local freedoms and shared responsibility. And the manual gives to the local community of faith great freedom in organizing its life, and the parameters of that freedom will vary from region to region. Consider one example: buying, selling, leasing, renovating a faith property in cooperation with the regional council within denominational guidelines opens a doorway to other interesting questions. You see, currently, by a statute of the Parliament of Canada and by legislation in most of the provincial legislatures, property belongs to the United Church of Canada, and it's held in trust by the local congregation. And that's why we have trustees. And that's why previously there was considerable involvement by the presbytery in major decisions relating to property. Put bluntly, at the end of the day, if a congregation entered into a contract and defaulted, it was the presbytery that was required to pick up the pieces. And so, not surprisingly, the presbytery desired some say in what they were being tied to. Now, in some quarters, this was seen as excessively paternalistic and too slow in reacting for some congregation. Now, at one point in the evolution of the three-council model, there was the distinct possibility that all property would be turned over to the ownership of communities of faith, which would create some new headaches. All of those federal and provincial statutes would have to be altered, and that's a big job. And we would also need to ask the more theoretical question, what about those items that were given in trust to the United Church of Canada, but for the use of the local congregation? Can the United Church now simply turn around and give all of that to the local community of faith for ownership and not simply for use? Well, we've avoided those challenges by continuing the reality where property continues to be held by the denominational council, and some decisions require involvement of the regional council. But it looks different from region to region, so you need to be clear about the restrictions and freedoms within your particular region in regards to property matters. Spiritual life is another area where the community of faith has considerable responsibility. For example, setting policies for membership within denominational guidelines, receiving and celebrating new members in the community of faith. I invite you to look up the policies for membership in the current manual. You'll find them in Polity section of the Basis of Union 7.4.2, 7.4.2. What did you discover? Well, you probably found that membership requirements state that no terms of admission to full membership may be prescribed other than those laid down in the New Testament. Those are pretty broad and likely to remain so, which means that individuals will be able to move their membership from congregation to congregation across the country without challenge. Other aspects of spiritual life are pretty straightforward in terms of spiritual growth and development and the administration of the sacraments, all under the responsibility of the community of faith. Ministry and other leadership. Both the region and the community of faith are involved in calling, covenanting, and appointing with ministry personnel. The presbytery used to have a much larger role in that through the joint needs and joint assessment and joint search committees. That has been narrowed, and we will look at it more closely when we look at the pastoral relationship in coming classes. And of course, there are limitations. All authority and responsibility of the community of faith is subject to policies set by the denominational council on various issues. How those will be expressed and communicated and enforced will vary from issue to issue. So, how do you feel about all that? What parts of that give you a sense of possibility and joy? Are there any places where you've already said to yourself, I need more information about that one? Are there any parts that, with what you know, already trouble you? There are many different models of local government, and we simply don't have the time to consider all the combinations and permutations. It's important to realize that the model of governance that your local community of faith is employing must be included in the terms of covenant with the region, and if you change those terms of governance, you need to notify the region. Our philosophy of local governance can best be described as great freedom within the bounds of certain shared rules and regulations and a relationship with the wider circles of the church. We've never had a strictly Congregationalist polity, such as exists within the Baptist or Disciples of Christ tradition. Now, there are a couple of exceptions to this model, and you need to be aware of them. One is the collaborative ministry model. The collaborative ministry model is the name given to the following situation. Assume congregation A over here is able to afford to pay for part-time ministry, and congregation B over here is also able to pay for part-time ministry. They can join together in a collaborative ministry to call ministry personnel. All they share is the ministry. Although it would be best practice to establish a joint ministry and personnel committee to look after things like the ministry personnel and shared administrator, perhaps, office expenses, and so on. But in organizational terms, they are two separate communities of faith joined together by their collaboration in calling or appointing one ministry personnel, or perhaps more than one personnel, but they have no organizational union. The other exception is found in what are called joint or shared ministry pastoral charges. This is when the United Church of Canada enters into a formal arrangement with a congregation of another tradition. Joint United Anglican charges are, I think, the most common numerically, although there are joint Lutheran United Church, joint Disciples of Christ United Church pastoral charges as well. There may be others. And when you encounter one of those, whether you're called or appointed to it, or whether you have to work with it in some other fashion, you'll generally need to give some attention to the documents drawn up during the formation of the charge to discover the details of local governance, because often those shared or joint pastoral charges have to take into account the different traditions and their loyalties to different bodies and so on and so forth. And those things should be recorded in the local governance documents, and you need to be aware of them. Finally, today I want to talk with you about trustees. In the United Church of Canada, all property is held in trust. That includes real property, personal property, lands, buildings, manses, schools, cemeteries, you name it. It's all held in trust. Please underline that in your mind. The local congregation, community of faith, pastoral charge owns nothing outright. Now, there are a limited number, no more than 30 across the country, exceptions to this pattern. Those occurred when congregations joined either before or after union, and by some historical anomaly were allowed to or avoided signing the model trust deed. The model trust deed used to be included as an appendix to the manual. Now it's available for reading or downloading from the United Church of Canada. In 99.5% of cases, everything that is held by a congregation or a pastoral charge is held in trust for the United Church of Canada. You don't need to memorize the model trust deed. You don't need to be able to quote it or know it off by heart, but you might find it useful to read that as a document that gives some clarity of the relationship of your community of faith to the larger church. And this holding in trust may come as a surprise to some people in your congregation. After all, they've done the work, they've raised the money, they've maintained things. They don't own it. The law is quite clear. The civil law of Canada is quite clear. It's been tested any number of times. What is held in trust for the wider church. Now, the Board of Trustees is one body which officially exists at the congregational level. Committees of trustees are congregational boards. And because trustee matters are often matters which bring us into contact with civil, contractual, and on rare occasions, criminal law, they are handled with great care and great attention to detail. When you come into a trustee matter, you need to be aware of the need for great caution as you proceed. Now, not all trustees must be United Church members, although a majority must, and the serving minister is the chair of the Board of Trustees. That may come as a surprise to some people in your trustee board. Many of us choose to designate somebody to be the chair of trustees. It's just one more role that we don't have to do. Trustees are directly elected by the congregation, and trustees have quite extensive power over the real physical property of a congregation and could act in a very arbitrary fashion. In most cases, however, they tend to be pretty responsive to congregational opinion. A couple of comments about the trustees. In some congregations, trustees have also morphed into finance and property committees. And that's okay, and if it gets the work done, but you need to be very clear that the rules governing the actions of a board of trustees are very different than the rules governing a finance or a property committee. So when the trustees are acting as trustees, you need to be careful to follow the appropriate set of regulations. The other thing that happens is that trustees tend to be respected members of the congregation. That's fine. But it's wrong in principle, and it's often counterproductive in action to tie trustee membership to either length of membership in the congregation, personal wealth, clout in the community, apparent financial support for the congregation. You need trustees who are able to do the work when the need arises. Some congregations have the habit of appointing trustees almost as an honor. Joe or Mary, well, they're not really able anymore to handle the work of being on the church council, so we'll make them trustees. Not a good idea. Find another way to honor people, because trustees need to be able to do the work. And in our time, there may be a lot of work, because there's a lot of matters around property, buying, selling, mortgaging, and so on, which require sharp minds and folk who are able to follow the nuances of property. So I urge you to have a board of trustees that can do the work that's necessary. Now, regional approval is required for the buying and selling, leasing, and especially the mortgaging of property according to property rules established by each region. In most regions, there will be a threshold below which, in terms of cost, regional approval is not required. So you don't need regional approval in most cases to fix a toilet. But you do need regional approval to enter into a contract to re-roof the sanctuary. Somewhere in between, there will be a threshold for your region, and you need to know what it is before you enter into any sort of maintenance or renewal or building and so on. I also encourage you in these matters to contact the region early. Region and denominations, I know they're somebody other than our local congregation, and they get in the way and we can do all of this. The fact of the matter is that the region and the denomination council exists to help your community of faith be as effective as it can be in its ministry and mission in God's name. So they have contacts, they have experience, they have, who knows, experience from bad things that have happened to other congregations that you can draw on. As an example, I have been really impressed in this period of COVID-19 with the speed with which the denominational council and the regional councils have changed decades of policies to make it possible for communities of faith to thrive and survive in difficult times. They're there for your good, for your support, to help you not make mistakes. Please consult them early, consult them often. That's what we need to say about communities of faith. I look forward to our conversation. Take care, and God bless you.